Welcome to Safety Talk. Personal safety expert Pete Canavan shares his insights and interviews experts who provide simple and effective tips, techniques, and technologies to keep you safe and secure both online and off. Here's Pete.
Hello and welcome to Safety Talk. On this show, we discuss and bring attention to a wide range of safety and security products and solutions that are available to both businesses and individuals in the digital world and the physical world. I'm your host and personal safety expert, Pete Canavan. As a self-employed information technology consultant since 1995, and as a martial artist for over 20 years, I bring decades of personal safety and security experience to my role as the host of this show. To learn more about me and how I can secure your home or business, you can always visit my personal website at petecanavan.com. So thanks so much for our listeners for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can reach at safetytalkvideos.com. We appreciate you helping us spread the word about Safety Talk and the different safety and security solutions that exist, because at the end of the day, we all want to be safe and secure. So don't forget to talk about us in our social circles. Now, this episode features a man who started his career in law enforcement. In this work, he experienced firsthand, through that direct experience, the inefficiencies in security and safety that put individuals at risk. Building on that experience through his work in the United States State Department and also in Fortune 500 company security and safety technology leadership group, he built a consultancy to help organizations identify and address risk. He also began to see that there's a real need for companies to achieve higher levels of protection using service-based approaches, and that allows Fortune 100 level security operations to be adopted by organizations of all sizes. He's the founder of RAS Consulting and Investigations and RAS Watch, and he brings his clients a rich body of work and demonstrated experience in workplace security, private investigations, police service, teaching, and instruction. He's proud of his work as a police officer and investigator, and we obviously thank him so much for his service, and also as an instructor for United States State Department's Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program, and as a leader of a Fortune 500 company's global safety and security group. As I mentioned, he is making an impact in the world today. So it is my pleasure to welcome Ryan Schonfeld to Safety Talk. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Pete. Good to be here.
Happy to have you on the show. Show's all about safety and security, and it sounds very interesting when I came across your information about how you can provide services that are typically only able to be afforded to and maybe implemented by Fortune 100 companies that can be utilized by smaller organizations. And I think a lot of people would be very interested in that because we all don't have Fortune 100 company budgets.
Right.
So let's start off with just how you kind of started on your journey in safety and security and law enforcement and that, and then we'll get into some of the details here.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said in the intro, I started my career in law enforcement on the East Coast. I was kind of a weird guy. I went and got a master's in IT, specifically system design and development. And from then have kind of always been on the high-tech side of crime and investigations. Started with the State Department, training foreign governments in identification and seizure of digital evidence. And then moved into the private sector, actually running a branch for Securitas, global guarding company. Having relocated to the West Coast, it sounded like a good idea to go work in Hollywood, being a LA transplant. So I went to Fox and started as a manager of global investigations, and then moved in and led the global security and safety technology group. I got frustrated, to say the least, in my role there, not with Fox, which was a great company to work for, but in the security industry. We were trying to scale this global program and leverage a technology-first approach. And what I was finding in the industry was a lot of antiquated approaches and practices, and a lack of help from people who understood our culture, the technology, how it would drive operations, and again, really have that culture and technology first approach. So I founded RAS Consulting and Investigations. And through that work, we work with organizations to conceptualize, design, implement, and run security programs.
Both physical and digital?
Yeah, our primary focus is physical. However, we have crossed over to digital and cyber because the reality is in uh, you know this day and age there is there has to be a converged approach
Yeah, they're
to
intertwined.
absolutely, and anybody who doesn't have that type of approach is way behind. Um, we started doing a lot of work in the tech world and the venture backed company world, and uh, finding companies that were growing faster than really anything we'd ever seen before. After closing major funding rounds and doubling, tripling the size of the company in a year's time, what we were finding is that the security programs for those organizations weren't scaling with the companies. And when you go back and ask and look at why, I mean, it's obvious security is very expensive. It's a cost center. It doesn't drive profit or revenue. It doesn't help them with valuation. The venture capitalists who put their money into it don't necessarily want huge capital security expenses. And so we started looking at the market and said, how can these companies need security? We understand that they can't afford the massive capital outlays that a Fortune 100, a Fortune 500, even a Fortune 1000 company could do. And so we reimagined this security as a service model and launched RAS Watch as a subscription-based service for these companies to give them this sort of fully baked security program as a subscription-based service where the cost would grow as they scaled as a company, but they didn't have to drop millions of dollars into building out their programs.
Interesting, because, as you said, there's not a direct correlation between the investment in security and safety and the bottom line. And so with a startup that's getting, funds from people that expect to see that return as quickly as possible, it's hard to sometimes justify. But on the flip side of it, if you have a problem that puts you out of business, now everybody loses everything. So you really cannot afford not to invest in things that are going to protect the company. Because I mean, even a ransomware attack, which can get through anybody's security, and we've seen that time and time again on almost a daily basis. If you have some sort of backup solution that is not taken into account, an offsite backup solution that gives you the redundancy with maybe on-site backups that could potentially be corrupted in addition to the primary data in a ransomware attack, you're in big trouble, and you can't go back and rebuild that easily. And as you know, the vast majority of companies, the effects from a cyber attack can be very costly if they can even recover. And about a third of the companies that are attacked, they and held for ransom, they never recover. And so now what's the risk to an investor now when you say, well, we need to invest in this because you may lose your entire investment if something were to occur of no fault of our own, but just because the cyber criminals are getting smarter, and we have to make sure that we invest in the training as well as the technology to protect, today's individuals and businesses both. So now
the risk and cost to the company too is not just hard dollars and cents, right? There's brand and reputation and all of these secondary effects. Customer data breaches, in lawsuits, and brand and reputation can have just as much of a negative effect. And you actually said a key word, which was return, right? Business leaders want to see a return on their investment. And the nature and problem with security is if you're doing a really good job, measuring the return on investment is going to be almost impossible because you should have no events with which to measure your return.
Exactly.
That's always a challenge in pitching spend for a cost center.
Yeah, and so you try to get somebody to wrap their head around it. Well, they're like, wait a minute, we can't measure it, but yet we need it. Well, right. Yeah, because the alternative, there is no alternative. You have to do it. So we've seen, and we're going to get into a little bit more of the details of what your services provide. I'll pull up the site and let people see, and then you can kind of explain some of that. But our focus has really shifted in recent months now to how do we mitigate the impact of the risk from the COVID-19 pandemic. And, much as we are all getting sick and tired of hearing about it, it still is a reality that we have to deal with. And from a risk perspective, as those in security, leaders in security, you, me, et cetera, we have had to really shift our focus and say, okay, well, traditionally we've had to deal with security issues that dealt with maybe physical breaches or workplace violence or active shooters or, acts of nature, fires and floods and hurricanes and tornadoes and that sort of thing, as well as cybersecurity breaches, ransomware attacks and just other things that, maybe tricking people into, supplying corporate data or giving credentials out or, hacking email accounts. I mean, there's so many different things that we have to worry about. But now we've got to worry about a whole nother sort of category of risk, and that is the health and safety in terms of the employees and what is the economic impact of these shutdowns, these slowdowns to today's companies. And I think a lot of them are seeing that, hey, you know what, we've gone to this virtual model, and that has now enabled us to a large extent in a lot of companies, other than ones that absolutely have to be on site, like, service-based companies, you can do a lot of work, if not almost all of your work, virtually from anywhere. And so if you're able to do that, you are, on the one hand, reducing the risks in the physical environment at the office, right? But then you are increasing the risk from a cybersecurity perspective, because now you got more and more people logging in remotely. You've got a lot more potential holes in the network. So looking at it from that standpoint, it's like, all right, we've looked at it in years past one way, and it's kind of been sort of the norm and the standard, but now that's sort of been flipped, and we've had to add this whole nother component to it. So having the ability to invest in services and technologies that you can do and you can scale as a managed service really makes a lot of sense for companies. And so the risks that they're facing and how they're addressing those risks really, on an almost daily basis, it's changing. And, just when we think we've seen it all, we haven't, right?
Yeah, the risks have absolutely shifted. Obviously, the majority of companies right now are operating with a decentralized workforce. Interestingly, a lot of companies have been surprised how effective the model's been for them. And so the nature of what we're seeing is, as companies look to build their post-COVID operation plans, it's interesting to see how many of them are reducing their square footage footprint, how many of them are going to stay decentralized and with a remote workforce. And that really shifts the nature of security and how organizations have historically imagined physical security and cybersecurity for their organizations. The other reality, and we've heard COVID described as a silent killer, invisible enemy, all kinds of different names. But the reality is, for organizations who have historically defined perimeters for their facilities to guard against bad actors, we now have an invisible virus that is our new bad actor that the perimeter of the facility needs to be regarded against. And those procedures have been a huge focus for us and our clients over the last few months in how they secure their workplaces for the people who do need to be back there already, but also the new procedures for the folks who are working from home on inherently insecure networks connecting into corporate systems.
So from the, looking at the current environment now, from what you're seeing, what would you say are some of the key challenges that these companies are facing from an organizational standpoint when they're looking at it going, how are we going to address this? How are we going to address that?
I think communications, communications is always a problem, or always results in problems for organizations. And I think one of the things a lot of companies are finding is that a lack of or ineffective communications and regular communications with their workforce is causing more problems than benefit. We've seen different organizations try to bring their workforces back to the office for a host of reasons. Some of them probably didn't have a real reason to need to be there. Many of them do because they're in the logistics or manufacturing space where you can't do that from home.
Right.
And I think one of the things that companies hadn't really anticipated was the amount of pushback that they were going to get from the employees in terms of coming back, because number one, in many cases, the companies had done a great job of preparing for the return and putting in good practices and policies, but they had done a poor job of keeping the workforce informed of what the new expectations were, what the term I hate, new normal was going to be when they returned to the office. And so all of a sudden they got this notification that said, hey, on this date, we're coming back to the office, and people just didn't feel safe.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is you're seeing all of these additional challenges get thrown in as a major monkey wrench to that traditional return to the office because of the uncertainty surrounding, for example, education. And, how is a family that has a couple of small kids that may be in, second, third, fourth grade, how are they going to manage going back to a physical job when their kids are only going to be, going to school, say 2 days a week, and then cyber school 3 days a week? How's that even going to work? So I think a lot of people are saying, hey man, can't I stay working from home? I'm getting my job done. As you said, unless it's something where you have to be like hands-on, like in manufacturing or service or something. But that I think is throwing a huge monkey wrench into the whole situation. And every day we're seeing more things getting canceled, and it's damaging to the psyche of not just the adults, but the children as well. Could you imagine having, and a lot of people out there listening to this probably do have children that were really looking forward, they got maybe gypped out of their spring sport because it got, shut down in the middle of March or April there. And then now with a return to quote normalcy and trying to get, these kids back to, the soccer field, back to the football field, back to the sports that they want to play. And now they're being told they can't do that. So now there's a huge letdown. And I know, my son has been out of school a year, my middle son, and his senior year, he was a star running back for his football team. Well, if that had never happened, he and us would have missed out on that whole season, and it would have never happened. So I can only just imagine the pain that parents and student athletes and students are feeling because they're losing that season. And so it's a mental drain. It's an emotional challenge, an emotional, problem. So, I mean, mentally and emotionally, as well as, physically, being able to stay in shape and run around and do your sport is all a holistic approach to what makes us really function as a society. And so without that return to a normal or a new normal, just like we had after 9/11, right? We had the new normal, the post 9/11 world. We're unfortunately going to see a post COVID-19 world. And for better or for worse, it's going to be here, and we're going to have to adapt to it. But it's causing a lot of problems that are a ripple effect throughout the whole world, really. And that's really scary, and it's not fair, but there's not a whole lot you can do about it either.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a parent of two young kids. It sounds like my kids are younger than yours, but my daughter is supposed to start kindergarten in a few weeks. And she is starting kindergarten via Zoom. And my wife and I are still trying to figure out what the heck kindergarten over Zoom is going to look like.
You can't do it. You can't do it. My wife is a second grade teacher.
Yeah.
And in those early primary grades, you have to have the interaction with the kids. You have to have them playing with things in the room. You've got to have them seeing the things on the walls. You've got to interact with them. You're walking up and down and checking on things. You can see them. All of these different things, you got to change what you're doing every 20 minutes, right? You got to keep their attention going. You can't have a kindergartner sit in front of a Zoom meeting all day. It will not work. College, fine, unless you have to go to like a lab or something, right? It's a lecture. What the heck's the difference is a lecture? I'm listening to the guy on the screen or girl on the screen versus going to a building and sitting in a chair and listening to them. That's different. But in the primary education levels, like you're saying, you got one going to kindergarten. It's not gonna work, and they're gonna suffer because of it.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the impacts are great, and it's crazy to see all of the different industries and segments of industries that COVID's impacted, not only directly but indirectly, as the impacts to the economy and people staying home have gotten greater and greater. I'm somebody who was on a plane almost every week last year. Flew 100-something thousand miles and 100-something nights in hotels. And, I've been on probably 2 planes this year pre-COVID. I've stayed in 1 hotel. So all of those industries are just decimated. But the impacts, it's not just the cost to those businesses, right? Or you think about Disney here in California, or Disney in Florida, where there's kind of entire cities' economies built around that park being open and having tourism and having people there. So it's just really wild to see the effects, and the companies that are starting to reopen or that are looking to reopen, some of them have been hit so hard financially, yet they have to spend all of this money to put safety and security controls in place to even get their workforce back safely with money that they likely don't have to spend right now.
It's a double whammy. They're not pulling in the income, and they've had to spend more money.
That's right. And in the last few weeks, if for anybody that's been watching the news, there's been more and more lawsuits and class action lawsuits that have been popping up against organizations and corporations by employees and unions and families of employees for workplaces that just did not put, or at least in their opinion or allegedly, did not put the right safety protocols in place for people to come back to work amidst this pandemic.
And that's a mess, because that's totally subjective many times. There are no hard and fast guidelines, right? They're told, clean things and sanitize things, and there's no real set standard. So I think a lot of these lawsuits should never even see the light of day, because this is an unprecedented thing that's happened. And so really, organizations and individuals both should be insulated from that. You shouldn't be allowed to do this. You know what I mean? Because people are taking advantage of it, right? It's almost like they're gold diggers. It's like, well, we can say that they didn't do this, and we can sue the company and make money. And I don't agree with any of that. They need to, look, if you're not comfortable with something, you need to make a change. Don't blame people unless there's a blatantly obvious problem where, like, for example, nothing was done, or you have evidence and proof of something like that. But otherwise, what can you do?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it goes both ways. We have a system of justice here where anybody can sue anybody for anything, and it's up to the system to weed through the garbage.
Right.
But I think there's there's two types of people here. There's the organizations that are doing the best they can with the information that's available, and there's the organizations that are doing nothing, and there are some that are taking advantage of their workers and are not putting safety first. And I think there should be liability for those folks. But
right.
The reality is, but the reality is none of these organizations have ever dealt with anything like this before.
Right. And you get conflicting information. One day you hear you're supposed to do this, the next day you're not supposed to do that. It's like,
yeah, no, it's constantly evolving. And, one of the things we talk about with our companies in terms of COVID protocols that they put in place is, if you think this is something that you're going to write once and set it and forget it, then you've got completely the wrong attitude, because this program is going to evolve and adapt as new information becomes available. As I said, nobody's done this before. It's new for everybody. The CDC's information is changing frequently. The products that are emergency use authorized by the FDA are getting authorization. Authorizations get pulled. They get new authorizations. So if you can't be nimble and adapt quickly, there's another thing coming, I think.
Yeah, it's wild. So let's look at, obviously before this whole thing happened, there were the quote, normal risks that workplaces had to deal with. But now in this landscape of, the post-COVID-19 world, how do you help organizations identify those risks? As you said, because especially when they're changing constantly.
Yeah, I mean, the risk by definition hasn't changed, but what those specific things are that can impact the organization and the potential negative outcome of those has changed. So they still have many of the same risks, although with less people coming to the office, or for companies who are closing their offices, obviously that profile has changed slightly. Adding this pandemic obviously into the mix of a risk and what its potential impact to the organization is huge. And so I think putting in, helping organizations understand kind of where their people are, both physically and also within the scope of COVID, right? Who's had the virus? How have they done? Where do they stand? How is the organization going to do things like testing and symptom reporting? And we don't say contact tracing in the context of a company, because that's really a public health function, but workplace exposure tracing,
which is essentially the same thing. So I'm glad you brought that up, because, how important is that in your opinion? Because, some people would say, well, look, we don't do this for every other type of, sickness or disease that's out there. Obviously, COVID changes all the time. It can be very, very bad, but it can also not affect people so badly, such as in the very young, right? In children, they found that, there's not a single instance of a child passing it to a teacher in the entire world at this point. And so that's not something you have to worry about in a workplace environment. But in a workplace, as you said, they don't like to say contact tracing, right? But workplace exposure tracing, how big of a role do you think that is going to play, or is playing, as people begin to return to their place of employment?
I think it plays a big role. I think it needs to play a role. The reality is, the U.S. doesn't have a national infrastructure for contact tracing. And so for companies that operate in multiple cities and states, the only thing that they have for them are the local health departments in each of those municipalities. And it doesn't really help a private sector company with what's happening across sort of a cross section or across their organization. And so I think companies really need to take it upon themselves. They do not need to become public health departments, but I do think they have an obligation to let people know that if there is an exposure in the workplace, that there has been an exposure and what they need to do. What I think companies are doing really wrong is right now, let's say you've got a building with 5 floors and 500 employees, and one person tests positive for COVID that works on the first floor of that building. Many companies are saying to all 500 people on the 5 floors, stay home and quarantine for 2 weeks, when in reality, by definition, those 500 people have not been exposed. And so the approach that we're taking and helping companies implement and actually offering as a managed service is a much more surgical approach through integrations into the access control system, the Wi-Fi system, Bluetooth location sensors, so that we actually know where people are in the building, how close they are to each other, if they're together for that prolonged period of time that meets the criteria of a contact. And then rather than sending notifications to 500 people to stay home for 2 weeks, which can be hugely disruptive to the business of the company, maybe it's 5 people that are contacts, or 10 people, or 15. And I think that's really how organizations have to approach it. Otherwise, once a month, they're going to have their entire company quarantining for 2 weeks.
Yeah, which is absolutely insane. Now, one of the things that your company, RAS Watch, does, and I'll pull the setup here. People are watching this on the video. If not, they can go to raswatch.com. But on the screen now, I pulled it up, your website, because some of the services you offer are access control monitoring, which you were just talking about, where you're saying that you can actually, the company can access or manage and monitor, I'm assuming, the access control. Maybe you can explain that a little bit to our listeners.
Yeah, so the stuff that's on our website are the services that we've offered pre-COVID. We have not added a section to the site on some of the COVID services. So access control monitoring is really looking at door events like a door being forced open, door being held open, and remotely managing that event for a company as if we were their in-house security operations center.
So so let's take this then a step further and kind of extrapolate it out. So let's say my company hires RAS Watch to monitor my access control. Mm-hmm. If there is, let's use your example of I have a building, I've got 5 floors, I've got 100 employees in a floor, so I've got 500 employees. Are you able to, or does the system already have in place, or does it have the ability to be such that if, Mary on the second floor has tested positive for COVID, are you able to then go back and say, okay, over the last week, where has she been in the building and who has she come in contact with, using sort of the logs and some of the other things that the monitoring will enable you to do?
Absolutely. So we can definitely say who was where in the building over the last week. Who was in contact with who is going to depend kind of on the granularity or the deployment of your access system. So, if you've got one card reader per floor, then the only granularity that we can find is who was on that floor each day. Whereas if you have to go through 5 different doorways to get to Mary's desk, I know who came through that last doorway closest to her desk. Now, tie that data in with the Wi-Fi data, right? So where was Mary's phone connected to the Wi-Fi in the building, and for how long? Or, for companies that want to do Bluetooth location, you can see in real time how long people were, where they were pretty specifically, and how long they were together. And so the more data that we can add to our query when we find out that Mary's positive, the smaller the pool of people that we have to notify to quarantine and get tested is.
So you could basically pull up a report and say, okay, here are the criteria that we're looking at. Give me a list of everybody who we need to or should notify, and say, hey, you need to be tested because you potentially came in contact with somebody that was tested positive. And then you can just take that subset of those 500 people, let's say there's 50 of them. Well, now you've only got to worry about a tenth of your entire workforce than the entire workforce. And obviously that's huge from a business perspective, because is it going to be perfect? No, it's probably not perfect, but it's going to allow you to, still keep 90% of your people, working as opposed to the alternative.
That's right. And one of the things that we made sure we put in place for our clients is testing, because it's been a real problem in several markets for employers to get their employees tested and get the results, more importantly, back in a timely manner. So we have a partnership with a private lab that still guarantees 24 to 48 hour turnaround on the FDA authorized tests. And on top of that, the tests are shipped directly to the employee's home for self-administration. So they don't need to show up at a public testing site. They don't need to wait for an appointment. They get something overnighted to them. It's a FDA authorized saliva-based test. They spit in the tube, ship it back, and 24 to 48 hours, they're either cleared to return to work or they're confirmed positive.
That's awesome. Very, very good, because obviously you need to limit exposure, and that's a great way to do that. So let's talk about a few of the other services here. You have this anomaly detection using real-time machine learning. What is that all about?
Yeah, so in a historical approach in a security operations center, you see a bunch of screens on the wall and guards or people sitting there kind of statically watching those displays. Mm-hmm. We know that that's a highly ineffective approach to monitoring security. And so by leveraging various machine learning algorithms and analytics, we're able to have our folks' attention drawn to events that are anomalous. That within the field of view of that camera, these things don't typically happen, or they should not be happening in that location or at that time. And so rather than getting that screen fatigue of somebody statically staring there and zoning off, their attention is drawn to those events in real time.
Which keeps them sharper, and that's a huge thing, like you said, because somebody's sitting there staring at screens all day long, you kind of get blind to it. It's like you look at anything for a long period of time and all of a sudden you just don't see it anymore. So that's awesome, because if it's able to detect, certain anomalies that you've programmed into the system, whether it's, problems with power or some other sensors that have been programmed, maybe a water, it's detecting a water leak or something like that. That's the kind of stuff it can do, right?
That's right. Some of the other anomaly detection stuff that's important, particularly with this decentralized workforce, is really understanding where your people are, when they typically work, what they normally do, and alerting when things are out of the norm. So like if you know that somebody's working from home and all of a sudden their badge scans at the office in the middle of the night, that's an anomaly. Or somebody is an hourly employee that typically only logs into their system or into VPN from home between these hours, and all of a sudden there's a middle of the night login or a 2 a.m. login. Those types of anomalous behaviors, even if they're not blocked, need to at least be flagged and investigated.
Well, it's got to be awesome having your IT background, because it helps to be able to sort of, design and then, see these sorts of things implemented, because, technology can do amazing things. And when we're very specific in what it is that we want computers to do, they're usually very good at it. And with the advent of, faster processing power and, using artificial intelligence and machine learning, is essentially, AI, right? You're able to do a lot more with that. So that's fantastic. Some of the other services you also have here. One of the biggies today is obviously social media, right? So, what is the monitoring and analysis there? Is that so if somebody mentions your company name in a social media post, it can be flagged and you can be alerted?
Yeah, that's right. We use social media monitoring for really two main functions. One is for threats against businesses and key folks within the business. So whether somebody, a disgruntled employee, is making threats of workplace violence, there's also brand awareness implications from what people are posting on social media, and so we're able to kind of target those things that we're looking for, keywords. It's not monitoring employees and what they're posting on social media. It's really about monitoring keywords and topics about an organization.
That's awesome, because damage control is something that you can, lessen the impact if you catch things early, right? So if something's going on online and you kind of can nip it in the bud before it gets out of control, that's huge. And, organizations, they have an obligation to do that, right? Because they have to answer to not just their employees, but to everybody else involved in the company. There may be boards of directors and shareholders. And so anything that has a negative impact on the organization could, for example, impact share price, right? And if your shares of your company drop by 30%, that could be a huge problem. And it's going to make a lot of people very nervous and upset and angry, et cetera. So being able to mitigate those risks is a very, very important thing today, because we all know that stuff can spread around the internet like wildfire. And, all of a sudden somebody posts something and next thing you know, it's shared 10,000 times and you're on the front page of the paper and you're being talked about in the news that night. And you're going, what in the world just happened? And so that's something that's very critical today more than ever. And so that's a very cool service that you guys provide.
Well, you mentioned active shooter, which is, for your everyday business, it's probably a low likelihood that an active shooter is going to occur to most businesses. However, it's one of the highest impacts if it does occur. Right. And the reality of active shooter events, if you go back and look historically, is there's almost always a good pre-event indicator. Whether it's a manifesto that's posted to social media, something that's written online, a way in which people were interacting with coworkers, friends, family. And so it's inexpensive and high impact for organizations to look for those indicators. And it's not just social media monitoring, it's workplace violence awareness training for the employees so that they know what to look for when they see or hear somebody say something that should be an indication or a trigger for them, who to report it to, how to report it. Those are all very low cost things that companies can put in place to protect their people.
Sure. And at the end of the day, your people are the most important assets to the business. Without them, it doesn't work. Right. Something I thought that was really cool when I was looking at this, at your site here before we came on, was, one of the big things that I talk about all the time is being armed with awareness, right? Situational awareness. And the importance of being aware of the people, the places, and the objects around you, the things that are occurring both locally as well as globally, regionally, et cetera. And so when I saw this, I thought it was really interesting because you have the ability to sort of monitor and have like a situational awareness component that looks at anything that could potentially be occurring around your business or around sites. If you've got a disparate, business and you're in, 5 different states, you could be monitoring things that are happening. And, as we see riots occur, like crazy all over the place, that's something that I think would be of really, people are going to realize how much more important a service like that is today than 6 months ago.
That's right. Yeah, definitely knowing what's happening around you, and it's the protests and some of the looting and violence that occurred during all of the protests. This was really key to some of our clients protecting their assets during all of that. But then there's the everyday run-of-the-mill stuff that happens. Like last week, I think in Texas, maybe there was a hazmat train that derailed, and there were toxic fumes in the air with 20-mile-an-hour wind gusts within about 2 blocks of a customer's facility. And so being able to proactively let them know this is what's going on, suggesting remediation, like closing the windows, turning off the air conditioning, making sure that they were aware of that event and its potential impact and recommended remediation.
So does that technology monitor for any news events within the defined area by region, by state, by GPS locate? You know what I mean? Like how would that work? So like if I'm here in Northeast Pennsylvania right now, let's say there was an event and I was subscribed to the service and something like you said, like a train derailed and the toxic fumes are spilling out into the air and blowing my way. That's obviously going to be something that's going to go right out, maybe on the news wires or on, different news agencies. So would you monitor the local news stations within that geographic area of where a client is located, for example, as well as like news wires? Like I'm just trying to dig a little bit deeper into how that would sort of do that.
Yeah, it's more automated than that. But and typically our information's coming in before the wires have picked it up. But we subscribe to several services, which include data from RSS feeds, social media, self-reporting, publicly available, CAD dispatch information that, police or law enforcement are responding, fire's responding. So we're getting the information pretty early. We get to know, what level of validation the event has. So if it's only like one citizen reporting this, then it may be unverified, and
right.
Either do our own research or wait to see a second or third person report in. Kind of similar actually to like the Citizen app, for example. And the way it works, it's actually a software where we plot the locations of all of our customers' assets, so longitude, latitude, and we're able to set notification parameters around the types of events, the severity of the event, and the proximity to the facility. And we send out notifications to customers based on those thresholds and parameters.
That's awesome. There's a company that I learned about at the ISC West show, in New York the end of last year that I went to. And they had a technology there that I don't know if you interface with it or if you've heard about it. And I'm going to have to, after the interview, I'll have to try to find and get it to you. But they provide that sort of service, and they know about anything before anybody else. Like the federal government uses their service, and I was blown away by it when they were showing me how it works.
Yeah, we subscribe to multiple platforms.
Yeah, it might be one you're using already. I just can't think of the name of it offhand, but it's super cool because that's exactly what it does. Is it helps you know about things basically almost instantly when they occur. In whatever. Like you said, with whatever parameters you've set up to be notified with. So that's all really awesome stuff.
We have a couple of hypotheses for kind of how RAS Watch operates. One is that organizations are affected by security much younger in their life than they were historically, largely because of of social media. We have such a polarized world right now. But because of access to more information online, and companies are global earlier than they ever were because of that, their risk profile is increased at a younger age as a company than ever historically. And the second piece is that every company we talk to would put more security in place if it was affordable and accessible. And so the reality is companies can subscribe to the services you're talking about that you saw at ISC that provide the intel, but in practicality, most of them don't have the teams in place to monitor them, to action the information when it comes in. Generally, they don't have anybody around the clock, and so there's a whole liability question around, well, if we received a critical alert at 2:00 in the morning when the one person who gets the alerts was sleeping and did nothing with it, is that actually improving the liability of the company, or is that making it worse?
Right. No, it's a good point. So the communications aspect of it is big as well. And that's, you guys have, mass comm built into it. We're not going to get into every one of these, but, incident management, so you can manage, any incidents that, you can focus on the business, tracking the travel of your employees, and support for investigation. So very, very cool stuff that the company does. So I encourage, people to look at raswatch.com and take a look at what the company's services are all about, because today you can't be too safe. You can't be too secure. We see challenges cropping up all the time. It's very difficult for you to, keep your finger on the pulse of all of them, and it's impossible to. So having a company that's devoted to doing just that is really going to enable you to focus on your business. And that's what, we all need to be doing, is focusing on our business and the bottom line, and, in our lives, and not have to worry and waste a lot of time setting up or reinventing the wheel when it comes to, different services and things that can improve the safety and security of the business. So very, very interesting information, Ryan. Now, how, without getting into the specifics of pricing, how do you bill for a client? Is it like a monthly service? Is it based on number of employees, based on number of locations? How does that part of it work for someone who's interested?
Yeah, we're a subscription-based company. So the good news for our clients is there's no major capital outlay. It's you pay monthly for what we provide you, and generally it's based on a per employee model. Gotcha.
So if they want to, subscribe to the service, they can do so. They can just build it in as a monthly expense. And as the company grows, your cost might go up a little bit. But again, what's the alternative? By being able to implement a lot of the services that RAS Watch provides, it's something that's going to really, I think, give people a peace of mind. Insurance companies are going to love it, right? Because they're going to say, well, hey, look, you're being real proactive. Maybe they'll, maybe even give you a break on your insurance policy to a certain extent.
We're working with some of the major carriers on that right now.
Oh, you really? Yeah, that's interesting, because that's one of the things I thought of, and it's something that, hey, if they don't have to pay out, millions and millions of dollars in claims because a service was able to prevent a major problem, whether it's, whatever it's related to, I mean, that helps everybody, insurance companies as well as the business and the employees. So now, how does this really help a company that says, okay, well, I have all my operations are on site right now. I have to keep making all these investments in technology. Every couple of years, I'm being told I got to upgrade this and pay for that. And I've got employees that I have to have, staff and monitor these things. So what would you say to them, in terms of what considerations they should be making when looking at maybe what they're currently doing at their business right now versus looking at a solution that you're providing?
Well, our platform, our solution really solves that problem for companies. They pay their monthly subscription. We take care of all of that for them. So they don't need staff to monitor. They don't need to worry about, consistent software upgrades and updates. And, we are their security and safety program in a box, everything that they need, soup to nuts. And we offer packages for, smaller companies with a more basic need. And as they scale and become more of an enterprise company, we have that package as well.
So they essentially would be able to, your system can tie in with the existing infrastructure, right? Through some sort of API interface or whatnot, where you say, okay, this is the system you're using, this is the company you're using. Great. We've got an API that can just pop right in. It can integrate with it. Then we program it into our system, and now we start monitoring it.
For the most part, there's a couple systems we don't want to interface with, but for the most part, the answer is yes.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, obviously nobody's going to interface with everything, but probably the bigger ones are the ones that are more commonplace. It makes sense to do that because
less about the bigger ones, more about the ones with like known cybersecurity issues and stuff that we just there's no reason for us to make an effort to integrate with those.
Gotcha, because it would increase the risk.
Well, yeah, I mean the company already has significant risk for themselves. We don't want to introduce that risk into our environment.
Exactly. Well, no, and you have to, because you got to keep your company safe too, right? And when you're monitoring and in all of these other systems, you've got to make sure you've got bulletproof security. I mean, there's no such thing as 100% secure, right? I mean, it just doesn't exist. But if you can make it, 99.9% secure, well, then you're doing a pretty darn good job. Right. So that's awesome. Now, what happens if there's a company, for example, that says, well, I'd like for you to take over maybe these sections of monitoring for me, but I still want to, do some of this myself, maybe physical monitoring of, my access control, but I want you to handle other things. You're able to do that, right? They can kind of pick and choose what they want to do.
Yeah. So we've got one client we're working with now that wants us to do intel, but they want to keep the monitoring of like door alerts and stuff internal. We're onboarding a client right now who wants to keep monitoring on site at their facility Monday through Friday business hours, but they want to shift it to us after hours, weekends. We've got one that we're working with right now to onboard that just wants us as a failover operations center because they learned during this pandemic that their resiliency was not as great as they had thought. And so they said, well, we need a backup GSOC, and we either can spend all the money to build a second one in Ireland or wherever ourselves, or we can just fail over to RAS Watch.
So they're able to do that. So they could basically say, I want you guys to only monitor off hours and weekends. And so there's something that just flips automatically, or they basically flip a switch and say, okay, we're done for the week. It's on you guys now.
That's right.
Oh, I love it. Because the bottom line is you got to stay on top of it all the time. And if you're a 9-to-5 business and you're not around all the time and nobody's monitoring it and something happens, well, you don't want to be notified with it after the fact, right? After somebody's already broken it. What's that?
It's a huge expense, 24-hour staffing. And most organizations are not 24-hour organizations. And so it begs the question, why do you need a team of dedicated people sitting there around the clock that probably are not doing a whole lot of work after hours?
Right.
So we're a shared service. We're a fraction of the cost of doing it yourself, even if you wanted to try. And so if nothing else, the numbers work out. And in this sort of not post-COVID world, but hopefully soon post-COVID world, where just about every organization, unless you're Zoom or, one of the other companies that has thrived through COVID, is looking to cut costs, it's a good option.
I think it's a great option because, like you said, a lot of smaller companies don't want or can't make a big investment in their security, even though they need it. So it gives them a great option to do so. And then having the ability to have it as a backup. I mean, security center, that's fantastic as well. So if, there's a problem with your primary, you can flip over to your backup solution and you can keep on cranking while you figure out what's going on with the primary system.
That's right.
And we're getting fast, close to the end of our hour here already. Always goes quickly. So let's just take a look, if you would, like future-wise. So there are obviously the current challenges that companies are facing now with regard to the pandemic that they've really never had to deal with before, both physical and cyber and everything else. What, COVID aside, what do you see next in terms of the trends in the industry going forward that are going to be required, that are going to be evolving?
Well, I think decentralizing is just starting. I think we're absolutely going to see more and more work from home as a policy that's offered to employees. I think we're already seeing a faster shift or faster adoption than we were previously to cloud and hosted solutions. From a whole host of security and infrastructure reasons, but also if you're closing down physical facilities, the need to house servers and physical infrastructure or even the ability goes away. We're also starting to see a lot more shift to vendors, managed services than in-house. And in the security operations center world, companies that pre-COVID had zero interest in our model or approach to security are all of a sudden interested again, because the question is, if we're closing facilities and having all of our workforce remote, what is this big operations center that we still have to staff real estate and heads for? So I think it's all going to turn on its head, and I think security leadership needs to be prepared to think about the workplace in the context of not just the company-owned facilities that they've historically thought about it, but how you keep your decentralized workforce safe in their homes, both physically and electronically.
Absolutely. So as a compact summary for those that are listening and watching, I always ask my guests to kind of give me the, their really concise summary of the company. And you sent something over and I thought it was great. And I just want to leave our listeners with this as we wrap up. And that is that basically RAS Watch takes the cost and takes the oversight of having a physical security operations center, and it shifts that to basically a service, right? Just like a software as a service type thing, and to an external service. And it's going to deliver the same, and in many cases, probably better oversight into what that risk landscape looks at or is for an organization. Because you're a company that does this day in and day out, that's all the company does. An organization that is, building widgets or selling products or, software or whatever it happens to be that they're doing, they're not in the business of safety and security. And so to be able to become an expert in it really isn't something that they can afford to do, or they need to do, or they should do, right? They need to focus on their business. So offloading all of that responsibility, or at least a portion of it, to a company like RAS Watch is something that I think is going to, as you put it, we're going to see this become more in demand as more things shift off-site, but yet you still need the capabilities of monitoring physical locations, right?
That's right.
It was a little bit longer than concise, but essentially that's what you're doing. You're taking that cost and you're taking it off the organization, and you're taking care of it for them in whatever capacity they want. And so that's really neat. So if people want to learn more about you, Ryan, or RAS Watch, they can go to the website is raswatch.com, and your other company is RAS Consulting and Investigations. That website is rassecurity.com. I'm assuming that they can find you on social media as well if they want to connect with you, right?
Connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay. The name is Ryan Schonfeld, Schonfeld, right?
That's right.
And I'll make sure I post those links on there. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to leave our audience with today?
No, this was great. Thanks for having me. I think the one thing that employers that are listening to this need to keep in mind, and it's reiterated by almost every law firm that we do work with, is do what would be seen as reasonable. And that applies to safety and violence and COVID and just however you operate, do what's reasonable.
Very good advice. Very good advice. Awesome. So for any of our listeners that are interested in free information about cybersecurity, we talked about that a little bit today here. You can discover the 7 simple steps to creating a cybersecurity program for your business by going to cyberbizplan.com. It's a website that I have. It provides information about how to create a cybersecurity plan for your business without being an IT expert, without having to spend tens of thousands of dollars on consultants and having to hire more people, et cetera. It really gives you a good idea of what to do. So again, thanks to Ryan from RAS for being here. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in to Safety Talk. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to get the latest security and safety information, as well as listen to past episodes at your favorite podcast network. Of course, safetytalkpodcast.com, and the videos at safetytalkvideos.com. So until next time, everybody, please stay safe.